So today's video is all about old police equipment, revolvers, and the general uniform, but particularly how would their revolver or duty arm integrate into their everyday carry and their overall doctrine on how they would run their equipment. So we don't have a super fancy original police type revolver. We have a Taurus 627 tracker, and as we all know, it's Taurus, so it's not the best, not the worst, but it's very usable, and we're just going to be using it as a demonstration for this because it is a single double action revolver. This one holds 7 rounds. A lot of the original police ones will hold 6 rounds. But anyway, without further ado, let's get started. So first things first, in this time period, they would generally, of course, not use auto loaders like the Glock. In fact, they would pretty much never use auto loaders. The Glock wasn't particularly invented till I think the late 80s, and it wasn't really considered a good, reliable till later. As far as I know, I'm gonna put something up there about that. More cops were already trained for the revolver. The logistics of switching over to everything else was different. I mean, you keep in mind that even with the invention of the 1911 pistol that had been in service with the U.S. military and then the M9, there were autoloader options. It's just that for law enforcement carry, they would mostly keep the 6-shooter because it just worked. And yeah, one thing about the 6-shooter and how cops used it is they generally would not use it with .357 Magnum. So for example, the main Smith & Wesson model that they used primarily was only chambered in .38 Special. And even if they did have guns that were capable of .357 Magnum, they'd usually only carry .38 Special for a couple of reasons. One being that less recoil for less trained cops, and less noise. Less recoil, less noise, and worries of over-penetration. But I think it's primarily the former than the 2 former points than the final latter point. There's this really old FBI training video, I think it's from the 40s or the 50s. They did not yet use speed loaders until, let's say, around the 70s, and then they were using Safariland speed loaders. And they weren't using twist speed loaders like these HKS loaders right here with snap caps. They were using the push speed loaders, which do have some benefits, and I'll go over those. For example, if you have a push speed loader, so you just push to release the rounds into the cylinder, then it simplifies the overall movements you take when reloading. So for example, you could just push, drop everything in, and the reason why that's good is for one-handed reloading. Because if you have to reload and you just got, for example, this isn't the best example, but there's some instances where you would tuck it into your shoe or your boot. If you were to tuck this into your belt, like so, and then try to just push to reload it, because let's say this hand is just, it's shot or damaged. Well, it's going to be a lot harder to do all this because then your cylinder is just going to churn. In this case, it kind of wedged up against the speed loader pouch, so that worked actually really good. But that's not going to be a reliable method of worrying about that. So the main limitation of the revolver, as they learned from the Miami-Dade shootout in Florida, I believe it is either 1988 or 1989, is really when police started transitioning and departments started transitioning to autoloaders, primarily what they would call the Wonder 9s, so like the Glock, the M9, double stack magazine handguns, and that was mainly because capacity, less to do with overall power. The 38 was even sufficient, but more to do with actual ammo capacity. For example, with the 38 Special, it worked just fine. The main issue was, of course, the capacity. When they got into that shootout in Miami, the 2 suspects, the perpetrators, were armed with a semi-auto rifle, and I think it was a Mini 14, a Ruger Mini 14. That kind of just gave them overwhelming firepower versus the FBI agents at the time, who were mostly armed with double single-action revolvers, and I think a couple of them might have had Beretta M9s, I'm not sure. It's some form of autoloader. Overall, most of the cops were only armed with revolvers, and it led to 2 deaths and many injured among FBI team that was on that call that day. Another thing I will say, a mitigation that they would use, it was called the New York reload. So you would have your main duty pistol, and then you would have a backup snub nose, either on your boot or, you know, up against your ankle, or just in your pocket. That would be a great thing versus reloading with one hand in some cases, and obviously 2 guns is better than 1 when you're in a shootout, because if something malfunctions or breaks, then you have something else to switch to. And that's traditionally called the New York reload. I think it's called the New York reload due to, well, the prevalence of the NYPD using it, but also now it's called it due to legal capacity restrictions. I think that's why it's called that, but it's called the New York reload. So you'll just carry a second revolver, because they just used revolvers back then mainly. And they have a little snubby. This is a Rock Island Armory M206. So it's essentially a Colt detective clone, and it's pretty cool. I do recommend it. It's all steel, but we'll do a video about that later. Another thing I will say is, if with any sort of pistol, if you're preparing for security, crap hits the fan, or if you're just defending your home during a time of known civil unrest where you can prepare, definitely have a good belt. They would often wear something like this. This is a Bianchi duty belt. So it's basically Safariland's affordable lineup belt is the Bianchi, and I actually highly recommend it because it's solid. This is like my best gun belt I've ever owned so far. It's great. This is like really nice, and around $60. And then if you do want to get the Safariland, it's like $20 more, so you might want to get that instead. But this works really good for just, you know, whatever, going to the range, hiking, whatever the freak have you. So we'll just kind of go top to bottom of the gear. Dress and appearance was very important, not just at ceremonies, but on day-to-day on the road or patrolling the streets. So they would often wear a button-up shirt with either short or long sleeves. Tie clip was very important because it keeps the tie out of the way if you need to lean over or do something with your hands or anything really where a tie can get in the way, because they can get in the way sometimes. A plain black tie, just keep it ironed, everything. This is what they would do. This is a Safariland brand belt. Bianchi is a Safariland owned brand. They'd have a belt. They usually have an internal belt, so I have an internal leather belt as well that is fastened to this outer equipment belt / gun belt with these belt keepers on both sides. You'd have your basic things like your flashlight, you know, your basic equipment, your speed loaders. If I were a police officer then, I'd probably carry 4 speed loaders, because you always want to have more firepower. More ammunition is better. I think I've seen pictures of them back then, a lot of pictures of police, and they would, some of them would carry 2, some of them would carry 4, so it was kind of just whatever they did, I guess. I don't know, maybe it was a department thing or an individual officer choice, not exactly sure. We've got boots. Most duty boots were Goodyear welted, with leather soles until later. Well, probably around the 70s, they had more rubber soles back then. But one thing I will say, I think is the coolest thing, is definitely the overall equipment setup. When you think about pistol competition shooting, we still use very heavy-duty stiff belts, or even in other tactical scenarios. Just the way they looked, belts, they had more like finesse. They were usually leather, not nylon, like a lot of ours are nowadays. They were tooled, so like this one has like a basket weave pattern, or they were like patent and they were really shiny and they look really good. But yeah, overall, so yeah, that's the thing with the overall police, municipality police uniform of the time in the United States. It just looked really good, really professional, really clean. So I think it's really cool, just as like someone that's interested in that history. Something I will say, it was definitely very practical too. It looked nice, but it was very practical. They had these things on lock, like they had their methods for reloading on lock. You know, they had methods for reloading one-handed, your revolver in different positions, laying, kneeling, standing. You know, they had methods for everything, and they really knew how to use their equipment. The equipment that police have access to now is much more advanced, and that is good, and it does save officers' lives. But good police departments, not all police departments train their officers equally as well, but good police departments have always found a way to make the equipment that they have at that time period work really well and be very functional. So yeah, that's kind of it for revolvers on older style police loadouts. And thank you for watching. You have a nice day. This was Arizona Bushcraft. We of course discuss other things like guns a lot and historical things. We discuss guns, history, etc. A lot of stuff in Arizona, things like that. So anyway, thank you for watching.